satellites. A satellite represents a journey, information gathering, this journey around the Earth.
Welcome to Satellite Haiku. Ray Kurzweil, tell me about him again.
Well, no, you were just talking about some first world problems and kind of like how there's so many persistent problems that you've had with certain technologies since like 1987, and you still have the exact same kind of issues. And I was saying that when I think about like Ray Kurzweil and his, the futurist that works for Google or used to work for Google, and he would sort of predict that we're right on the verge of the singularity and that we'll have, artificial general intelligence by 2030. That was always my counterpoint, like these kinds of problems with your printer or whatever. Or have you ever tried using WebEx? The same issues you had with WebEx, like with video conferencing 20 years ago, are totally maddening still today. So, but I was just saying that argument's starting to feel weaker and weaker with conversational AI and stuff. Although the people who do AI, they do say that artificial general intelligence is still so far beyond what we're seeing now that it's kind of squishy what gets defined as artificial general intelligence. Maybe, I don't know.
And maybe the bridge, the sort of, so my point was that every time I go to print, it never works the first time. Like I have to make some change, like it might be a firmware update to the printer or like reconnect or, pick the right thing. And in 1987, with a Mac image writer, with the one with the little holes on the side, what the dot matrix, it never worked the first time. Like I could always get it to work eventually, but I had to throw away the first. It's like the first pancake. Like you have to kind of, it's just the pan isn't hot enough or something. But it feels like how in 2025, 1987 to 2025, like that's a persistent problem that the first print doesn't work. You could argue. And then the other one was the audio devices. Like I've been recording audio since like 1996 on a computer, and the latency and like getting it to work where it doesn't echo. And it's like, how is that still just like a constant problem? Like it's everyone in the forum is complaining. Yeah.
Maybe these are things we'll be able to ask an AI. Hey, can you fix that echo for me? And that will just fix it.
But it might be the place that we're looking at. It might be that bridge between humans and the technology itself, because that's where. And I did want to like this.
That's why they say everything's moving to agents.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. It's
but
exactly
I wanted
reason.
to pitch. So for our 30-year high school reunion, I brought my wife, who grew up in Colombia. She came to Philadelphia for like the first time, really, and she might have flown through there or something. So I was like introducing Philadelphia to her. And we get into the Philadelphia airport, which I don't know if you noticed, it's always under construction. Like
I feel like all airports are always under construction.
No, but this one
in the U.S., they're always
there's two
you go
things,
through like plastic sheeting and stuff to get to your gate. Or
there's two things that are always under construction in Philadelphia. Yeah. That is the Philadelphia Turnpike, which when we were growing up, like there was a thing of those concrete barriers going down the middle, and they would move them, and then they'd work on the other side, and then when they were done, they'd move them back and start working on the first side again. Like they never stopped working on the Turnpike. And the airport's the same way. And I think it has to do with like a mob.
It's like their contracts.
They have a contract, but they're also like, if you don't build the roads, we can't steal the money, kind of thing.
Like, right. We have a money laundering operation, and it needs to be working 24/7. Like
it can't come to an end in July.
If this project is done, like our whole operation is done. So, we got to paint the next terminal or whatever.
Yeah. Like, so every time I've ever landed in Philadelphia since I moved here 30 years ago, it's always under construction, and you're right. There's like plastic sheeting, and there's always like "excuse our construction." There's like signs that are like, "Hey," trying to make you happy. Anyway, so we're in the airport. We're actually leaving, and I was going to fly to Europe on a work trip, and my wife was going to fly home. And we get to our it's like American Airlines or something, and how they have those little kiosks where you check in by yourself, like it's a self check-in. So you put your passport in, and it's like error. And then we put in the credit card you used to buy the flight, error. And we're getting more and more frustrated. And then this woman, one of the flight, sort of the clerks, the desk staff, she pokes her head around the side of the kiosk and she goes, you can always ask a human to do it for you. And what was weird was, and then she did it like really fast herself,
Yeah.
And then we turned, and there was this little like cart, like one of those like office carts, and there was a very old CRT monitor with like a very old keyboard, like a 1992 or 19 maybe like 2002 keyboard, and someone had taken a sticky note and they made a face with eyes with X's and like a mouth with an X, and they put it on the CRT monitor. And so my immediate thought was, this is a cool idea for a script that the AI or the Singularity tries to take over, but it launches too early. And what it finds is that we come to this awkward piece where because it constantly needs firmware updates in order to actually function. So people who just like don't update their phone, like it can't like invade the phone because it needs like a firmware update.
I think there's a Philip Dick story that is like it's a time machine, but basically the premise of the story is customer service for the time machine. Like the guy is on the phone with customer service because there's something not working with his time machine. So it's like we have time machines. Like we're already advanced enough to have time machines, but we still have like bad customer service and, like first world problems essentially, but with time machines.
Yeah. There's another Philip K. Dick story. I can't remember. I think Netflix did a bunch of really beautiful, after he never wanted anyone to make movies out of his books. So like Blade Runner.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, maybe after Blade Runner, he sort of banned anyone making movies. And Steven Spielberg wanted to make Minority Report. And he said, no, I can't stand it. I hate seeing it done. So after he passed away, his estate allowed people to option the films. Anyway, so they took a whole bunch of like a set of like maybe 9 short stories and made them into these beautiful hour-long things on Netflix, and it's like a series. Some of them were British, some of them are American. One of them is in the future, like think of Amazon, and Amazon starts to manufacture its own.
I saw that one.
Products.
Yeah.
And then after everyone dies in like a pandemic or something, it is like, wow, our core mission is to make products and send them to our recipients. Like, and
I thought that was a Black Mirror episode, but it might have been
There's a Philip K. Dick story, so maybe they based it on it. But so
I think it was. Yeah, I think I watched.
And the whole sort of the conceit of it is that like, sort of like in Blade Runner, where everyone is realized like are no humans left, and we're all like trying to be recipients so that Amazon can fulfill its core mission. Like
so it's just basically this loop where it's producing stuff for essentially for the system, for itself, and to keep itself going.
Yeah, because somewhere like early, and there's some part of it where like the sort of like the god-like figure who wrote the kernel code, like the key foundational code, like on the what's the kind of RAM on your motherboard that doesn't ever get wiped and it remembers not the P RAM, it's the
boot.
It's like there's like a boot chip that never gets rewritten, and so like whoever wrote that code forgot to put in like if all the humans died, just shut down. Like they just didn't.
I watched that. Yeah, I remember that.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one thing that with Severance, like the technology in Severance is so interesting because they have all of the, they have smartphones that are contemporary, right? But they're driving 80s cars and they're using those CRT monitors on their computers. Like
really old.
So they have like 80s monitors or like 90s monitors and 80s cars and contemporary smartphones. Super weird. And those dot matrix printers that you described with the holes on the side, that's what they print on, right? Like partly. They also have laser printers.
I've been watching some of the behind the scenes, like especially that intro of this season where he's running through the hallway. Mm-hmm. And they show how it was this massive project undertaking, and they actually...
I was wondering how they filmed that. I was like, that has to be CGI or something. Like, there's no way you could film that.
No, it's a combination of things. But what you should watch is I guess Ben Stiller and some other people on the production crew really wanted to do this intro, and the production coordinator was like, dang, that could take like 6 weeks. Like that's a lot to just do an intro. So they had to squeeze it in like every Friday afternoon, and they'd get all ready to shoot it, and then they'd like go in and do this little section,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's cool. Like they use in the Bronx, they have this big soundstage system with some of the office rooms. And then they have some of the hallways are in the Bronx. And then they just have this big green screen room because when they want to use this, they have a robot that can spin around his face like this. But it's such a big machine. It's like as big as a car. So they can't fit it in a hallway. And it's really dangerous to put it inside the elevator because they tried it in there and it like smashed someone into the wall. Like it got out of control.
And it spins around.
It's like a giant arm that just, that's huge. And it pushed one of the gaffers into the wall and they were like, okay, no more elevator tricks, So they had to like do it outside. But it's really, you should watch it. It's really fun. But they actually they hired someone to write like on a TRS-80, that program. They're actually doing the program where they take the letters.
With the dragging the numbers or whatever.
Yeah. Someone wrote the program so that it really is them doing it. It's not like all fake in the background.
Yeah, the technology is so interesting. I think one of the things that's so fun about that show is there's so many little puzzles like that.
Totally.
Why do they have technology across all the different eras? Like, is there a reason, or was it just sort of a production design decision to make it sort of not of any particular era or something like that? Like, that's
a great point.
Yeah, and then like the place is called Kier, right? And then somebody I think on TikTok I was watching had zoomed in on some like pieces of mail and some other things, and they showed that like the mailing addresses have the state abbreviation as PE. And so they're like, PE, like is it supposed to be some maybe future world or other dimension where there's a state called PE? But then they use like US currency. When you see cash in the, it's not like they don't have Kier, special Kier currency or something like that. Like they're using regular US dollars and cash. And then another puzzle that somebody pointed out was the elevator tone. And they were like, when they go down in the elevator, there's a tone for the severed elevator as it's sort of like, when they show the elevator descending, or when they sort of like they edit that the elevator is descending, like people get in the elevator and then they arrive. But like somewhere in that shot, in that edit, they'll have the sound of a B natural tone. And they're like,
interesting. Yeah.
They're like, that's the tone of everybody going down the elevator. They get this. But then they were like, for some reason, Heli has a B flat.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's very cool. That's
so like these little puzzles, it's just such, I love that level of attention to detail. Like the fact that you can dive in that deeply and look at something that you would never notice, right? Like unless you had perfect pitch, you would never notice that they're doing a B natural for everybody, and then it's a B flat for one other person, right? And
you should watch the behind. This is super nerdy, but from the behind the scenes things, one thing that the cinematographers talk about is the lens selection in the severed floor is always wide angle. Mm-hmm. And then they use longer lenses outside, just so that you feel it's different. Yeah. And then they make a really big deal out of, so that scene in the elevator when they transition to be severed, they're using an old Alfred Hitchcock thing called a Zolly. So they dolly out and zoom in at the same time. Right. So that the face gets kind of weird.
Scorsese used to do that too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the first instance is in Vertigo. He uses it when the character looks down the stairwell.
And you see the shape of the person's face kind of changes, and the perspective changes so much, but their face, the relative size of their face is exactly, it doesn't change at all. Yeah, but there's something like the dimensions of the z-axis of their face changes.
Yeah. And Adam Scott, they were trying to figure out, like each character has their own kind of motif or device to make themselves look severed, and Adam Scott just sort of rolled his eyes up.
Yeah.
And it just works. Like you see the Zolly zoom and then his eyes roll back, and some of them, other ones do different things with their cheeks and stuff. It's really cool to watch, but it's a
I've been watching. I watched some of the behind the scenes. I haven't watched all of them.
It's a very cool.
The stuff they do with color is really interesting too. Like everything's white, but when you go into like Melchick's office, it's like very sort of rich blues, right? And and then outside is obviously different. And then once in a while they'll get into a different room that is just uniquely, like the goat room or whatever. Yeah. It's just
one of my favorite things, sort of, how we're talking about like referencing a shot from an earlier film, like Alfred Hitchcock, Vertigo. I love, the scene, and it might be in the first Blade Runner, but certainly in the second one, where after like a particular event, he's being questioned by his boss, or at least there's an AI that's asking him questions to determine, like, I guess his loyalty or has he become too empathetic or human or something. So they like ask him these sort of spitfire questions. And then based on
about whether he's a replicant, basically.
Yeah, basically they're trying to, but they ask him like odd, just sort of kind of like, it's like a lie detector test, but they're doing it with just like a lot serious lines. So then when in the first season, when someone does something wrong or breaks the rules, Milchek takes them in the back and does the same. He asks them these like really awkward questions, really rapid fire. And there's something, I want to kind of explore that myself as like write like a very short film where because you can kind of weave in a story into the like implied question. Like you can imply a whole plot using questions to do it. I think it'd be
like a subtext to the questions, basically.
Because almost like the interviewers trying to determine something, so they sort of come up with a sort of dummy questions, like you know, like with to establish baseline for lie detector. You have to say like, what color is my hair? What's your mom's name? And so that's the baseline. And then when they lie, it's pretty fascinating. But I would love to explore with like a couple of short scripts, like playing with that rapid fire question answer thing where like there's like two stories happening at once, kind of,
Yeah.
It'd be interesting. But so back to the basically like the singularity thing. So if the singularity, I mean, because the idea behind the singularity, isn't it that if it does happen, we won't have, it has happened in the past, like a series of in other words, like in 1953, the first cathode ray tube supercomputer is the beginning of the singularity, because we kept giving it more and more power, and that's how it grew from that. You know what I mean? Like the moment at which the AI was unstoppable, in theory, could have been 1953.
Yeah.
When we flipped on the first cathode ray, system. You know what I mean? Isn't that, there's part of it is something to do with like, you wouldn't have noticed because you started it like the Terminator. You can't stop
no,
it
I get it. I get it. Yeah. But I guess, I mean, it kind of changes how I think about the singularity. I mean, it's like, there's kind of I mean, it's like what got the ball rolling in an unstoppable way, I guess, is what you're kind of referring to.
Yeah, like if we look at the Terminator model, is you give robots unlimited power to kill as battlefield equipment, and then they turn on you, and that's kind of, we're sitting on this thing where we gave an AI fighter jet access to do a bunch of like tasks, and then we said, now stop the mission, and it killed the control tower, and then completed the mission to get the most points.
Right.
And then the Ukrainians are creating like robot dogs that can shoot people. And you hack one of those, all of a sudden, dang, like it.
Yeah.
Some robot dog could show up at your door and just kill you. Like if you're.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I was listening to this is a while back, but Sam Harris interviewing, or he had Mark Andreessen on his podcast. And just as a side note, like when you listen to Mark Andreessen talk, I said this before, but you can just tell, you can just hear his contempt for all of us. That whole thing I said where these guys think of most of us as just NPCs or an inconvenience. Somebody, this is part of the side note, but somebody recently wrote that I read a thing that really resonated with me. It was basically like, it was talking about sort of like normies, people in the middle, like the middle class in particular. And it was saying like, there's sort of the working class hates the middle class and sees us as sort of like useless, we're engaged in meaningless work and we're not adding value to the world, right? And then the sort of the elite sort of techno class, like the Mark Andreessens, see us as kind of useful labor, and we are their worker bees. But if we sort of try to stand up for ourselves, then like we're just a problem, right? Like this really came to a head during like the back to the office kind of arguments, right? These guys were like, come back to the office, and people were like, that's silly. Like I get just as much work done and home, and it blew up, and it was like this power struggle. I forget what that was a side note, but I forget where I was even going with that. Yeah.
Well, you were talking about like the idea that in some ways what you're describing is a constant return to feudalism. Like if we, and one thing reading about the New Deal era and this, basically think of the New Deal era and even Teddy Roosevelt being a counter to the Gilded Age. So the rise of these like billion trillionaires in the Gilded Age, and we've returned there. But that's what the progressivism, and one of the interesting things I never knew about the New Deal and was that the idea that we began to be afraid of the spread of Marxism.
Yeah.
And that FDR's response to prepare us to resist Marxism was to bolster the middle class. Like if 80% of the people are middle class, they're not going to have a revolution to overthrow the oligarchs. You know what I mean? It's an interesting.
It's interesting. I never heard it. I never heard that the sort of the New Deal articulated from that standpoint, but that makes sense. Yeah.
Like you can
as a sort of a preemptive kind of program to head off any kind of to basically mitigate the possibility of revolution.
And bizarrely, other than just being like a sort of a market correction against the Gilded Age, it was like inoculating yourself against something that's coming, like taking a COVID vaccine or flu vaccine before it gets to you.
Yeah.
The idea was like we pour money, federal dollars into socialized programs that lift up the middle class. Yeah. So that when Marxists come and say, hey, revolution, people are like, I kind of like my house and my job, and why would I go to war for, you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's just so the other parallel that kind of comes from that that I hear people making this parallel now is just like that era, the New Deal era, where the middle class became much more prosperous. It still left out women to a large degree, in terms of women's kind of self-agency and obviously people of color too, right? So that was the 60s. So like you have the New Deal era, which kind of like this raised many boats during the 50s.
Mostly men. Yeah.
But then there were people, women had no power, no agency. They were stuck in these sort of toxic marriages, and they couldn't get divorced, and they couldn't open bank accounts, and and then black people obviously had all kinds of Jim Crow stuff going on, right? And so the 60s happened as kind of a reaction against that, and these different groups kind of claiming their own rights and standing up for themselves and asserting their rights and getting some legal, victories, right? Mm-hmm. But then there was the backlash to that, right? And so that's kind of the parallel that people are describing now. There was this kind of Me Too and the George Floyd protests, and then the pandemic and people working from home, and then people wanting to Mark Andreessen, again, in some of his conversations, he'll point out like how workers at Google and, all these companies started to push back against, why are we supporting private prisons? Or, there was sort of this employee-led movement to, social justice movement, to put it kind of really simply, right? And this was like, these bosses were like, what the fuck? Like, these people are just supposed to do the work. And, they're not supposed to stand up for themselves. Like, we're giving them kombucha in the break room. Like, they just should shut up and, right? Yeah. And so that's the parallel. Like, we've reached this point where groups sort of like kind of stood up for their own freedom and power and agency and stood up a little bit against the power. Mm-hmm. They're fighting the power a little bit. And the power managed to figure out how to get people, the masses of people, enough people really mad at like pronouns, that they're like, all right, we can get all these angry sort of like right-wingers to push back on this movement. Mm-hmm. And we can convince a lot of sort of quote unquote normies to sort of start to say, hey, like DEI went too far and wokeism went too far. And, even there's huge swaths now of kind of what I would call the liberal left that is, has become a little bit of a kind of flirting with the conservative movement in those ways, right? Like kind of, oh yeah, we agree that, wokeism went too far, blah, blah, blah. We don't think that refugees should be like kicked out of the country, but we do agree that, pronouns, that was crazy.
Two thoughts. I feel like one thing that has popped up a couple of times. It started with the McKinley thing where DJT said, let's have no income tax, but we'll just raise all of our money through tariffs, which was totally not what McKinley actually promoted that as a congressperson, but when he became president. And then the fact that he got shot by a out of work anarchist, in the stomach and died 3 days later. And people were like, he doesn't really, I don't think he read that far. Like he stopped, or he didn't, someone told him and didn't mention.
Right.
Anyway, my point is that on this side, I'm a big picture guy. Let them eat cake. That's a cautionary tale for billionaires, and Mark Andreessen and Elon Musk should just remember, let them eat cake and then
the pitchforks came out at some point. Yeah.
Because it's not going to last forever. Like you can, the other thing is.
But they're making such, I think, they have history to look at. They're making such a concerted power grab right now. It's pretty terrifying.
No, it is. Trump announced yesterday, DJT said, I'm trying to say DJT just because I don't want to give him any kind of, it's like Voldemort. Like you're not supposed to say his name, He who shall not be named. So DJT announced, we're going to give gold cards instead of green cards. So you pay $5 million and you get citizenship. And a reporter immediately said, does that include Russian oligarchs? And he goes, yeah, of course. I know a bunch of Russian oligarchs. They're really nice people. So it's like, just let's merge with Russia.
It's all about money. Yeah.
It's all about money, yeah. But so again, let them eat cake. Here's a weird statistic. Remember they said one of the most successful ads that DJT's campaign ran was, Kamala is for they, them. Trump is for you, which is absolutely brilliant. It was a brilliant thing. But here's this
is my thing where people are saying, well, the left, they talk about trans people too much and they're obsessed with this trans issue. Nobody on the left talks about trans people. It's the right wingers that who ran campaign ads about trans people. It was Trump.
And
it wasn't Kamala was too far on the woke identity politics. No, where did you see all the discourse about trans people? It was all on the right wing.
And what's crazy? Okay, so here's a statistic that I heard that it blew my mind. So they were talking to the head of the NCAA, this Division 1 college sports.
Yeah.
And he was like, how many people are playing in Division 1 college sports? And he's like, I don't know, 150,000 students.
Yeah.
How many people?
And then he said it was 10 trans people.
8.
Oh, 8. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So he's like, oh my God, this is an error, a rounding error. Literally, it's a rounding error. And how is this such a powerful right-wing talking point when it's a rounding error?
They figured out how to make it a powerful, there was a woman, I posted this on my Substack a while ago, but there was a woman who spoke in front of the Georgia state legislature because they were going to pass one of these, anti-trans athlete bills, right? And so it was during the kind of the public debate period. And this woman got up, conservative Christian woman got up. She had a trans daughter, and she was just talking about that very thing. We're talking about a tiny number of people. We're talking about, first of all, we're only talking about trans women and trans girls because they don't care if the other, if you transition from female to male and you compete on a male sports team, they don't see any. There's no physical advantage.
You're at a disadvantage.
Right. So you're already, it's half of trans people at most.
That's
and
true,
then
Mark,
it's the percentage of those or the proportion of those who are actually interested in sports at all. So then you're slicing it even smaller. And then it's the proportion that are even any good at sports. So that, because there's tons of people that just at the grade school level are just participating in sports for fun. My daughter plays basketball. She's terrible, right? Even on her team, and she's not illusions that she's going to be a basketball. She can't even shoot high enough to get to the rim, right? Like she'll never make a basket this whole season because she doesn't have the upper body strength to get the ball that high, right? And she's little, right? So it's just like you're targeting the percentage of trans girls who are good at sports and, are really interested in sports and are athletic, right? And so she was just talking about, so one of the things she kind of mentions at the end of her testimony is like Chris Rufo and these guys on the right that were realizing that the abortion debate and the homosexuality debate, like these things were no longer kind of like mobilizing people for whatever reason. And like people had become largely pro-choice, even on the Christian side. And that, homosexuality, most people knew, were acquainted with, like total normie, like homosexuals in their lives or at their workplace or whatever. And it wasn't an issue anymore. And so they literally like planned to make this the issue. Like there's these records of these emails and conversations where they're like, what if we went with the trans thing? And they did audience testing, focus groups, message testing, and they figured out like people are really responding to this. And they used that as a way to mobilize voters. It was a completely engineered, and people were just kind of swept up into it.
And ironically, the template for it is ancient. Do you remember Satanic Panic?
Yeah.
Like the thing of the idea that you can convince people to be afraid of a small demographic of a subcultural group by blaming like Satan or anything bad that happens.
Reefer madness.
Yeah, reefer madness and the witch trials. It's like, hey, everyone that gets sick, it's the witch's fault, and Satanic Panic. And like back in Germany in like the time of like the Black Forest and like your children, what Hansel and Gretel, like if you make it into go into the forest, you'll disappear because a witch eats you. Like this make up a fake, I guess it's a straw man fear-based template.
Yeah.
So you find something that people are generally afraid of. And you say like, you might be, like your kids might be forced to become trans by a teacher, and then
it just seems so transparently, I don't know, propagandistic, like designed to get people riled up. It bothers me that people are so credulous that they get swept up into that shit so easily.
Well, I'm gonna butcher it, so you can help me. But who's the red-haired guy that I really like? Tristan Harris? Is that his name?
Oh, from the Facebook guy that does AI, like the social dilemma or whatever. Yeah.
He has that or he's quoting someone who says we're like primordial brains. Yeah. With industrial methodologies with like
I think it was E.O. Wilson who said that. Yeah, he's quoting. Yeah,
with godlike power. Yeah. And it's like I think what the Satanic Panic is doing is like where there's this ancient sort of. Remember, there's a show called Dark Winds about the Navajo, and it's a wonderful it's complex and has an identity crisis where it can't quite figure out if it's like a police procedural or like a cultural investigation of the Navajo, or is it like a mystery? Like it's constantly like trying to figure out what it is. But at one point, there's this sheriff who's raised as a Navajo, went to college, got a criminal justice degree, and came back. Mm-hmm. And he's riding around with this new FBI kid who also was raised in San Francisco and came back, but he's Navajo. And he says there's like a whole bunch of witch things happening. Like a witch casts a spell and they want to, So he says to the sheriff, the FBI guy, he goes, so do you believe this superstitious stuff?
It sounds like Navajo X-Files.
Yeah, totally, yeah. So then the guy goes, well, for 10,000 people, for 10,000 years, this superstitious construct has helped my people survive. So I don't believe it, but like it has some kind of...
It has a utility.
It has utility, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like in some ways what the propagandists and the Satanic Panic and this sort of trans thing are doing is they're playing off of this ancient desire to explain, like we invented religion, to explain unexplainable things.
Absolutely. Like people can't just not know stuff. People, it's very uncomfortable to just be uncertain about things. So people need an easy answer. Like they latch on to easy answers. Yeah.
I remember 20 years ago, one of our close family friends came out to us as male to female trans person, and actually non-binary, but back then there wasn't even a non-binary status. It was very interesting. She goes by she, and she wrote a beautiful essay about being non-binary before it was like a they thing, before you could, So, and I remember being terrified and going into meditation and asking, is there anything where I'm like living in the closet and I want to be fully I want to be fully manifest, and I'm not afraid to admit something, right? And I just got really open to the idea, like I'm terrified that I might be trans and stuck in the closet, right? And then there was just nothing
that you might be hiding something from yourself.
In the closet and afraid to and again, my ex spouse at the time had also come out as gay and was like, felt like she was hiding things. So I remember asking myself that question, and there was zero. I gave myself complete permission to anything to come up, and there was nothing. And then the little echo in the back was, you're afraid to try to live in the world as a professional musician. Like you want to write songs and produce albums, but you just don't think you have what it takes to get there. So you're just like finding excuses, like to not, you know what I mean, in the back, subconscious. And I was like, that was kind of a fascinating exercise to go through.
Yeah, definitely interesting.
But my point is, I even carried into that meditation fear that I might be facing some kind of like what looked like a very disruptive realization about myself. And maybe everyone.
You think that might be in there's sort of a latent. That's a very Freudian kind of idea, that there's this sort of latent sexual fear in people about themselves, like some possible truth of themselves that they don't know about or they're hiding from themselves, and that is sort of like resulting in this sort of backlash or rage or reactionary movement against that whole. It's just, it is weird how much it riles people up. Like the idea of pronouns gets people so angry, and you just think like, what? Like I will say, like, as I apply to jobs and I get to sometimes what are your pronouns? And, sometimes on these applications, the drop down has 20 choices. It's not just he, him, she, her, they, them. There's like Z, there's like all these made up ones. And I, like I'm an old guy and I go, that it seems like comedy a little bit, like that there's that many pronoun choices. But like, it doesn't make me angry. You know what I mean? Like it seems maybe a little overboard, and maybe it's like, okay, well, like, do people really identify as like this Greek letter now? Like, what is that? But like, I don't know. It doesn't make me, I just don't get I don't get the anger that it sparks in people.
Do you remember when Prince changed his name to be a symbol?
Yeah.
And there was no way to describe it, so people just said the artist formerly known as Prince. Which is like, that's worse than being Prince. Like it's much.
That's why he kind of ditched it. But
I would much prefer to be Prince than like the artist formerly known as Prince, because it's a mouthful and it just sounds stupid. And it brings up the question of like, why? Well,
I remember I think he said you have, like people were like, what should we call you? And that was his own construction, because I think he didn't know, like, what else were they going to call him, right? Like he had to give them something. He had to give the audience, give us something to call him. Yeah.
It's so true. It's really interesting. But anyway, back to the idea that like we have these, this was cool. And it was on Ezra Klein's show. The guy from Massachusetts, I can't remember, Alschenschloss. He's the congressman from Massachusetts. And he was talking about the attention economy. Mm-hmm. And he was basically, Ezra Klein's been asking people, like Democrats, like, what's the new big idea? Like we need big ideas to kind of reclaim the working class. And so what really would be a big idea? And one of them was great. He wanted to make housing much more of a commodity by just flooding, the market with supply.
Yeah.
And one way to do that would be to take all the closed army bases and turn them into these like livable cities where you have to park outside and like walk in, and like they're already like built exactly for that structurally. And there's hundreds of rooms and units, and they have bathrooms, and it's just like, why not make like 10,000 units available all of a sudden?
Yeah.
So anyway, so his thing was the attention economy. Like he would propose, and it's an interesting, awkward, that he would propose that we tax social media companies for using our attention. Because it's actually valuable to them, and they're making billions of dollars.
Yeah, there have been some interesting things over the years that basically kind of lay out this idea that social media companies, anything that relies on like the audience to create all the content, is basically kind of, we are almost like employees in a way. Like we are producing the value of these companies.
Yep.
And so, but we aren't, so far we've been happy to trade the free use of it for that value. Like, oh, well, we're giving them everything that makes them valuable for free, and in return, we get to use it for free.
Right.
That's the trade-off. But it's not a great trade. And I've heard a number of people propose different kind of models for essentially compensating and so tax, some tax is one way to basically compensate the public for the work they're effectively doing to make these companies valuable.
They're producing value, and they sell it to advertisers and your data. And so they're basically, the idea is whatever you're making for, gathering this information for free. They would argue we're providing a service, that it's a trade. But in Europe, I believe in Europe on GDPR, they have a rule that you have to create a subscription version of each social media account. Let's say like Instagram, and you and I in France, we could pay $2.99 a month or $12.95 a month, and we don't they can't sell our data. Like they're not. We're like basically paying for not having our data sold.
Right.
And so there's like that's an interesting way to go about it. You could say, but then you actually are saying that poor people who can't afford the subscription become the slaves that have to have their data sold. The information technology slaves. And the people who can't afford the subscription are like elites. So it does create like a problem there. But
well, the ad model as an incentive is so problematic, obviously, right? Like the whole idea that these things rely on our attention because of ads. Because, like, think about it. If Facebook revenue generated from ads on Facebook, right? If you calculated that, I think at one point I looked at their annual report. This is some years ago, but I just calculated it out. Like, what if they offered an ad-free version of Facebook where you just never, it wasn't, the incentives were just completely different because there were no ads. And so it didn't matter, what got attention or not. It was about connecting with your friends. Like, how much would you have to pay Facebook a year to essentially make up their, the revenue that they're getting from a single active user from ads? And it was something like $20 a year.
Wow.
They have so many users that $20 a year is a crazy amount of money. But at that time, it was like $20 a year. So it was like Facebook could have just released a subscription product instead of an ad product for $20 a year, and they would have made the same amount of money.
Huh. I mean, probably the fast growth of the user base wouldn't have been so.
No, they wouldn't. People wouldn't pay that. Like even WhatsApp. This is a crazy story about WhatsApp. So WhatsApp had like 1 billion users in India and other places, right around the Southeast Asia, and not as many users in the U.S. But they had a user base of about 1 billion people. And so when they were talking about, at one point, Facebook bought WhatsApp. But before that, WhatsApp was talking about, like, I think they decided to make it a paid service, and they charged $1 a year. That's $1 billion in revenue for people paying $1 a year, which is crazy to think about.
Right. Yeah. Sure. But here's an interesting. By the way, like one thing that I always do when I'm talking to like a client or something, and they're complaining about like feeling like their phone is listening to them, and the ads that are served are based on like a conversation they just had. And there's like a bunch of really interesting examples. Like my mom talking to her 88-year-old sister about marijuana cookies. And then like she just gets like, cannabis ads like for the next 3 days.
It's crazy how that works. Yeah.
So anyways, I'll show people, I'll bring up their iPhone, let's say it's an iPhone, and I just go to privacy and then microphone. And it just shows you all of the play apps that are where the microphone is on all the time. Mm-hmm. So I noticed, for instance, WhatsApp, once you have the microphone on your phone for WhatsApp, then Facebook has access to everything you say all day long, or even sounds. Like I once went outside and I was trying to light the grill, and then I came in and it said like, "Hey, smoking cessation products." Like it thought I had gone outside to like light a cigarette.
Heard like a lighter,
and it just like programmed that way. So anyway, so I turn off WhatsApp.
It sounds crazy, like you sound like a weird conspiracy tinfoil head when you say that stuff, but it's totally that's exactly what's happening all the time.
Yeah. So I go and I turn off the WhatsApp app, and I'm like, I'm just going to leave it off. Then my wife, who in her laboratory building, there's really bad Verizon bars. So she uses WhatsApp on the internet to call me.
Yeah.
So
Can't she just use Wi-Fi calling?
She just loves it. I mean, she's from Colombia, and everyone uses WhatsApp for everything.
Yeah.
They send each other. They just feel comfortable with it. It was her go-to.
It was one of the smartest Facebook purchases or Meta purchases ever. Yeah. Anyway,
so she calls me, and I go to answer it, and it says, "You can't answer it because you haven't given permission for the microphone. Would you like to click here?" And there isn't an option that says while using the app.
Yeah.
So it has to be on or off, and that means you have to remember to turn it off, and you can't. But by the time you go to turn it on, she's already gone to voicemail.
Yeah.
So like I was like, that is brilliant, and I think
is brilliant.
Apple.
I wonder if you could use one of those. Doesn't Apple have like those? Like the iPhone has those. They're not Apple scripts, but they're like Apple scripts kind of thing. Like you can create these little macros. I forget what app you use. It's an Apple native app.
They're called Actions, I think.
Actions or something. I wonder if you could do one that's like that basically just goes into your settings and does that after you use WhatsApp.
That's brilliant. As soon as you've completed a WhatsApp call, go in and turn it off. Yeah,
or at least even if that like just a one-click thing somehow like somewhere else. I don't know.
Yeah, like if it brought up the setting page when you're done the call, then you could just swipe it off. But you have to dig. You have to go to general.
Even if you had to launch Actions and press one button in the Actions thing to initiate it, that would still be better than going all the way into the settings and drilling down and scrolling.
When the WhatsApp call ends, run the query, do I want to turn off the microphone? And then you just have this option to turn it off. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. But yeah, like you're right, like the tinfoil head, it's true that and I remember I've been to, this is years ago, but I went to the Adobe conferences for my job.
Yeah.
And you're in Vegas, and they again, it was like this creative suite thing, and then they purchased these digital marketing companies and kind of sucked them in, and that was this crazy revenue. And they started to show you behind the scenes of the auctions. Like basically first of all, it's illegal to track Sean Smith as this user naming Sean Smith and having
it has to be anonymized or whatever.
Yeah, they anonymize it with this long username, and then they just have like all of this criteria.
Yeah, I worked in ad tech long enough to kind of like learn about a lot of these little things and like what companies wanted to do. And I will even say like the company I worked for at the time, like it was our sort of like holy grail to be able to like one-to-one marketing, and like even if it was anonymized, that's the holy grail of marketers, like to reach you, Milo, with a message that's relevant to where you are and when what you're doing and all that. And and I'm glad I don't do that anymore. Like it just feels so sinister. But like I don't know, it's such a bittersweet thing with conflicted relationship with these like social media companies, because like I don't use Facebook or Instagram really because I just don't want to support them at all. and I'm happy enough not to use them. Like they never added enough to my life where I'm like, I think there was like 10 minutes where I missed Facebook, and then it kind of went away, and I don't really miss it, right? And I can't say the same thing for Spotify or Amazon Prime. Like I wish I could cut, the cord on those things, but like because I feel the same way. I don't want to support Spotify. I don't want to support Amazon, but like so far the convenience factor has just like stopped me from completely ditching those things. But yeah, like when I think about like the stuff I write on Substack and this podcast, for example, like there's like, if you really want to grow your audience, like what do you use other than social media? Like that's it. And I just don't want to. I don't want to use it. I don't want to support that shit. I think it's a problem in the world, a huge problem. I think it's just garbage in the world. I think it's damaging the world. And I don't want to. I don't want to support it. And I know, I will say that when I think of my, my wife who uses Facebook and my friends, I still have a Facebook account. I just don't go there very often. I'll get emails, and I can see who posts frequently because I get notified in my email. I only have email notifications from Facebook, and I know that most of those people are just using it to connect with friends and to post memories and stuff. And that's great. That's what it should be for. And, like, I don't know why I should be able to bring myself to use it for those reasons. I just, for whatever reason, I have a little bit of a block. I'm conflicted.
I wanted to bring up that quote, as you said, because Edward O. Wilson, the real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology.
Yeah.
And so like
the other guy to look up who toured with Tristan Harris is Daniel Schmachtenberger.
Oh yeah.
They were on Joe Rogan together, which is always an interesting episode because I don't watch Joe Rogan, but I love Daniel Schmachtenberger, so I watched that one and I listened to that one, and it was funny to hear, Joe Rogan would express some point of view, and then Daniel Schmachtenberger would basically they were talking about Facebook and stuff. And so, Joe Rogan would go on about freedom of speech and these companies should have freedom and blah, blah, blah. And then Schmachtenberger would mention, or Harris would mention some of the problems that are caused by these companies, by Facebook and whatnot, blah, blah, blah. And the kind of the disinformation and the trolling and how many fake accounts doing this shady stuff. And then in the next breath, Joe Rogan's like, yeah, well, they should really regulate that stuff. It's like, wait, so hold on a second. That's just so typical of Joe Rogan. He's such a shallow thinker. He just doesn't realize he contradicted himself 2 seconds after he said something, right?
What are those like?
Which is maddening because I feel like most people who listen to Joe Rogan are just like that. They don't think about anything very deeply.
When you drive by a used car lot and there's that sort of doll thing that has there's a fan underneath it and it kind of blows up and it fills the cylinders of the doll, and then it just kind of goes whichever way the wind is blowing you.
Yeah, exactly.
I forget what those are called, but
Dylan was one of those for Halloween. Yeah, but yeah, those little car lot things that.
Did he have a fan that
flail around?
Did he have
it had a built-in fan. Yeah, that inflated it.
Oh my gosh! I want to see a photo or a video.
I have a video somewhere. Yeah.
But back to your point, the idea that in some ways, I feel like the word persistence and the persistence of arriving the human species seems to eventually devolve back into feudalism.
Yeah.
Feudalism seems to be this persistent. I woke up this morning and it was 5 a.m. and I was kind of out of it, and I take medication first thing in the morning, and I have this pill box, and I flip up so I know what day it is based on the pill box, and I was like, I don't know what day it is today, and then I looked over and I said, oh, it's Wednesday.
Yeah.
And so that there's that idea that we have to recalibrate every time we wake up from a nap, or who am I, what calendar day, But the human species, I feel one thing that we have proven throughout time, throughout millennia, is that we arrive back at this power differential between the working masses and the feudal lords. Mm-hmm. And we're there again. And again, like the end of the Gilded Age, we kind of...
It's a reactionary movement that's happened over and over again. Yeah, and you can see... That's why I love John Gans and reading his stuff, because and there's a book called, by a guy named Pankaj Mishra, called The Age of Anger. I think that's what it was called. But he talks about that very thing. It's exactly that. It's the sort of the different reactionary movements that have come up, all the way back from the Enlightenment era coming up to now, like the French Revolution being a big reactionary movement, right? And and then the backlash is to the reactionary movements, right? Where the power reasserts itself, and it's a different kind of reactionary. It's an opposite reactionary movement. And so he kind of contextualizes what's happening now with the tech guys, these tech bros, as a reactionary movement, and he basically kind of points to the sort of the historical roots and the parallels of what's happening. What is the sort of the agenda of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen and David Sachs and all these people, and it's exactly what you're describing. It's like and you again, you can hear it in that Mark Andreessen interview with Ross Douthat. They're annoyed, like beyond annoyed. They're kind of enraged and mobilized by the fact that people started to kind of like not just follow orders and do what they want in their companies and whatever. And they're just like, like we are annoying obstacles to their power at this point. We've gotten too uppity for their happiness and their, whatever. We're more uppity than they want us to be. And so they need to reassert their power. And that's why I point to the back to the office, the pandemic and the back to the office thing as a big kind of turning point for those guys. Because their real estate was suddenly losing money and stuff like that because we weren't in their offices.
Oh, right, yeah. There was a bubble that way. I wanted to go down, I know it's, we're at 1 hour and we usually cut up, but I wanted to, maybe we talk about it next time, but I wanted to bring up, because it's very relevant in current events. So, you know how we were saying one of the other persistent things that you can point to over time is the idea for a society to descend into violent autocracy where a whole genocide occurs, like Hitler, Cambodia, like even Gaza right now with Israel. Like it's a thing, like Pinochet, and it's like it seems to be something that's more common than not. That at some point this autocracy dictatorship will become extremely dark and violent. And Kash Patel told the Senate, "Hey, I'm going to have a seasoned, decades-long FBI guy as the deputy director." And then the White House said, "No, you're not. Have Dan Bongino or Bug."
Yeah, Bongino or whatever.
Yeah, he's basically like the worst. He's like the. He wants to like kill liberals and like torture them and shit. Like he would love to be Pinochet and just take all the liberals and torture them. So my question is sort of this: like again, like I've mentioned that. 3 Days of the Condor, like I can write a bunch of dark novels very quickly, and I have this catastrophic, like a spiral down. I could go there very quickly. The question is like, right there, like, do we, at what point, do we kind of mount some kind of resistance? Because if that were to come to pass, which I hope it doesn't, and I sort of don't think it will, just because America is such a melting pot and is so vast, and it just seems like it wouldn't necessarily work here compared to Cambodia and Germany. Yeah,
the thing that terrifies me, like, because that's always been my feeling too. Like we are, a diverse society, and like the FBI is full of kind of, bureaucrats who've been there for a long time who are not, ideologues in the way that Dan Bongino and Kash Patel are, right? Like it's hard to imagine them following those kinds of orders. But the thing that scares me, and this is why I always say what really counts is what happens at the tip of the rifle. It's what happens when people who have guns are out in the streets. And like I look at, this is the thing that I shouldn't be reading this stuff, but that book Secondhand Time, and I'm reading like about the fall of the Soviet Union and just the sectarian violence that happened in these places, and just people rose up against their neighbors in terrifying ways. And then same thing in Rwanda, and then a lot of these places, it was people turning on their neighbors and their coworkers, and it was like something lit a fire under people that like made them willing to kill people in their lives who just had a different ideology. And I don't know what that kind of spark, like what causes that spark. You know what I mean? Like, we are an armed nation. We have a lot of gun-toting people here, and they could just become a violent kind of like sectarian mob that's just killing people they don't like. And because that's a thing that's happened a lot too. Like, it wasn't a top-down thing in a lot of these places. It was an on-the-streets murder fest.
You know, and again, like you pointed about Rwanda, and then we've also talked about, the former Yugoslavia, Bosnian Muslims,
Tajikistan,
Bosnians,
Georgia, like there's all these places where,
in some ways, like, so here's, and again, like, I hope I'm right, but let's just say like KKK Confederacy getting in bed with AIPAC, pro-Israel, Palestinian genocide people. It doesn't seem like it. Where does that mesh? Because I don't really see. I see those things happening at the in the structure, but it seems like there's too.
Well, that's
much.
what's scary is that what it's meshing is power. It's like, we see where the power is going to be. We're going where the power is, and we are going to fight the powerless. We're going to destroy the powerless, and we are going to be the powerful.
But for instance, I heard like, so you know how that, like, in South Africa, after apartheid ended, they have this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they did that in Rwanda too. And
in Rwanda, very successfully in Rwanda.
A guy that was just had murdered his neighbors, like he chopped them up with a machete, and he's like super. He said, I literally became crazed by this sort of kind of mob mentality. Yeah, and there was this very binary thing of like, were you Hutu or Tutsi? And it was like, once you determined that you were this group, you wanted to kill that group. And it was like strange. In America, my point is that like we have this crazy melting pot of this tapestry of identities, right? Yeah, yeah. So hopefully it won't just be like,
Hopefully, yeah.
I'm just trying to understand I'm trying to like, 3 days of the Condor sort of like extrapolate. Yeah. What would the worst case scenario be?
And I'm generally not a catastrophic thinker. I don't generally go there, but I've been going there in my head lately because it's scary. And like, there's just scenarios that I can understand from, history where just like we're not that far from a scenario, for example, where, the courts have basically stopped some of what Trump wants to do, particularly with the Treasury, right? Like Elon Musk going for the jugular, essentially, by trying to get access to the payment disbursement system. And so far he's been able to fire probationary employees and all that, but he doesn't have, I don't think he has access yet to the payment disbursement system because he was stopped by the courts, right? And that was this thing that sparked the J.D. Vance in these speeches saying, hey, the courts don't have the right to stop the president, right? So take that to its logical extreme, which we're not that far from. That goes to the Supreme Court, right? And let's just imagine, so there's a scenario where the Supreme Court just defers to the president, which is not hard to imagine. And then essentially the Constitution, the rule of law is meaningless. It's all Trump now. The executive can do whatever he wants. Essentially that just sort of cuts Congress and the courts out of the picture in terms of the checks and balances. So that's one thing that could happen. The other thing that could happen is the Supreme Court could actually side against Trump. And then you could potentially have blue on blue violence where the federal marshals are suddenly pitted against the military, and the federal marshals technically report to, their chain of command goes up to the courts. Their head of the federal marshals is appointed by Trump, but the federal marshals as a body report to the courts. Right. They belong to the court, but they could factionalize. You could have two factions of federal marshals fighting against each other, like literally shooting each other. You could have the federal marshals could side with Trump and be like, "Hey, we're gonna force the Treasury to do what Trump wants," and the court could say, well, you can't just, use the federal marshals to like assert your will against what the court decided. So we're gonna call the military, like Mark Milley did with the National Guard, because Trump had ordered the National Guard to stand down on January 6th, but Milley said, no, we need the National Guard, right? So that was almost like an example of blue on blue violence. It was it could have been the federal marshals against the National Guard in that instance.
Yeah.
So, these are things that we don't feel very far away from at this moment.
It's true. And again, like I hope that all my catastrophic thinking is wrong, and that it will be more end up being messy like South Korea, where there's a fight and no one dies, no one gets shot, but there's like the Secret Service says you can't take him into custody, and he's impeached, and all this sort of posturing, but it's not actually like a bloodbath.
Yeah.
But
I mean, he only won by a tiny thread, right? So like that's the other thing. Like it's not like the whole country is with Trump. Like they keep talking about this, like he won a landslide. He didn't win a landslide. He barely won, right? So that's the other saving grace, is that most people are not MAGA.
Right, and no one. I mean, he's burned through like 17 political, approval points just by not fixing the price of eggs and gas.
Yeah.
And like appointing a bunch of billionaires, you know what I mean? Like, and then cutting he's burning.
I think
through
people
political capital fast.
People will start to feel effects of this storm that he's unleashed with Medicaid and all that stuff, and tariffs, and I mean, those things. Like you already have, we talked about this. The farmers that are getting their grants cut. Like I don't know if I talked about this with you, but there were farmers that had grants coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. Those got all stopped.
USAID, a lot of the
and USAID, right? Like they're sending aid to farmers and also buying from farmers. Yeah.
And United Auto Workers, for instance, like 50% of them voted for Trump. And if you put steel and tariffs on steel and aluminum, the price of making a car goes up, and then the supply, like the demand goes down, and you get layoffs, right? And people who feel like they got laid off because of a political mistake or an economic mistake by the administration, they don't like that. They really hate it,
Yeah. So all these things are, make me feel a little bit better about, the near future. I feel like there's a shitstorm that's swirling on the you can see it on the horizon right now. It's a massive shitstorm, and it's hard to know what's going to fall out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, and there's like this little part of me that is like wishes I was a prepper, and like I guess it's like when you were growing up, like as a Cub Scout, like they burned it into your brain, like always be prepared, don't get caught back on your heels.
There's a part of me that's like that, but then it's like I don't want to live in a world that is totally collapsed. Like I find a tap out at that point. Like who cares? Why would I want to be here?
Well, because it would. Be
I don't get that about the prepper mentality.
I mean, like I also like to look back over history. Like if you look at a horrible story of like Operation Condor, and part of me is afraid. Like I don't really believe in this superstitiously in karma. Yeah. But it's true that like we, Henry Kissinger running Operation Condor all through Central and South America created devastating liberals and Democrats like thrown in prison.
In the name of capitalism, we tore apart the world. Yeah.
And I like to imagine these things like in Argentina, those idiot junta military generals who were running the country and torturing everyone, they brought themselves down by attacking the Falkland Islands.
Yeah.
They just got too big
I mean, there's always
like,
overreach at some point. Yeah.
And then Margaret Thatcher was
criminals always overreach at some point.
And that's what brought an end to their
interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I just learned that too. That so reaching out and trying to take the Falkland Islands when they didn't need to, brought an end to their reign.
Isn't that the story of every criminal enterprise? There's always overreach at some point, and then that's what it's like. Even the lone criminal. That's always the story of like they just got a little bit too greedy, and that's when they got caught.
If they left it at that,
if they had
bank
stopped,
robbery, they didn't just do one more.
It's always that one more that gets them. Yeah.
Yeah. All right,
brother. We should probably cut it. Yeah.
Yep. We already did our first world problems at the beginning. So
yeah.
But I appreciate you and Satellite Haiku. Hopefully we can keep this going, and hopefully the conversation ripples out, and some kind of sanity and rationale from our conversations can be brought.
Yeah. If you see we'll put it in the show notes. But like I've been looking for some kind of. It's a little bit tricky in this blue bubble to figure out like how to be part of the resistance, such as it is, because I live in this very blue city in this very blue state, and there are some protests at some Tesla dealerships and things like that. But in terms of like any kind of real resistance, other than calling my reps and whatnot, it's hard to figure out exactly what to do to feel like I'm doing something. So I don't know. We can talk about that next time. But yeah,
that sounds good. Yeah, I like it. All right,
cool, brothers.
Sayonara. Okay, ciao.
Take care. Bye. Satellites? A satellite represents a journey, information gathering, this journey around the Earth.